In today's episode, I'm going to share with you the tragic story of Scott and Laci Peterson. Scott was born on October 24th, 1972 in San Diego, California. His father owned a crate packing company and his mother owned a boutique. Scott was very athletic as a kid. He played football, he enjoyed golf, he actually became very good in it. He had hopes of actually becoming a professional golfer one day. That by the time of the end of his high school career, he had actually become one of the top junior golfers in San Diego. He would end up attending Arizona State University on a partial golf scholarship, but it wouldn't last very long as he ended up getting kicked off the team for partying too much. So after that, he decided to put his golf career on hold, and he ended up transferring over to Polytech. And it's not soon after that in 1994, it's when he would end up meeting his future wife, Laci. Laci was born May 4th, 1975. Her parents owned a dairy farm in California. Laci had started working on her family's farm starting at a young age and had really grown a love for it, although her parents would end up divorcing really early on in her life when she was just 2 years old. Laci's mother would end up remarrying, and from that point on, they would move to Modesto, California. As soon as she graduated high school, she would end up going to Polytech, where she would ultimately meet Scott Peterson. Laci was the one to actually make the first move when she met Scott. She had actually gone there because she had a friend who worked at the restaurant that Scott worked at, and she immediately, very quickly, just gave her his number. And she remembers explaining to her mother that I feel like, I've met the man I'm going to marry. And they would indeed get married on August 9th in 1997. Now, they would originally actually open up their own sports bar restaurant called The Shack. And at first, it was kind of shaky to get off the start, but it ended up turning into, a little bit of a success. The couple would end up selling the restaurant in the year 2000, and they would go back to Laci's hometown of Modesto to be closer to her family. They lived a very comfortable life in Modesto and part of the country club, and Scott had a very good job. Laci pretty much stay at home. But in 2002, they would announce that they would be expecting their first child together. Everything seemed pretty normal in their marriage. No one would have really suspected anything that would happen. But things really began to take shape on December 23rd, 2002. Laci and Scott went to her sister's salon where Laci would go for monthly hairstylings, and they just talked casually about their plans. Scott talked about, going to go pick up a present for her grandfather, and it just seemed like it was just, any other holiday time, nothing unusual to suspect. So the next morning on December 24th, it was reported that about 10:30 in the morning, one of the neighbors had noticed that the Petersons' dog was just sort of roaming around their yard unattended but still had its leash on. Scott had left the house that morning at 9:30 a.m., and that would allegedly be the last time that he saw his wife alive. Scott would go on to say that morning was pretty typical for them. They started watching Martha Stewart. They talked about cooking. Laci wanted to bake things for Christmas, and everything seemed right on track for the holiday. When Scott arrived home later that afternoon and he came home, he didn't see his wife. Initially, he didn't think anything of it. He wasn't panicked. He just sort of thought, oh, she must be out. So he had actually just sort of went about his day. He'd actually put a load of laundry in. It was actually just the clothes he was wearing because, they were dirty from the fishing trip. But by 5:15 that day, Laci still hadn't shown up. And so then Scott decided to go and check where she could be. So he called his mother-in-law, and she hadn't seen Laci at all either. And so it was at that point that she decided that they would go ahead and call the police. When police arrived, Laci's things were still there. Her purse, her keys were still in the house. Her car was actually still parked in the driveway as well. When police initially questioned Scott, he had first said actually that he went golfing, but later on when they asked him, he recanted and said, no, I went fishing instead. He'd gone fishing at the Berkeley Marina, and by the afternoon he decided to go home. At 2:15, he actually leaves a message on the family's answering machine to let Laci know that he was going to be on his way back home. It's said by one of the detectives that Scott's behavior was bizarre. He didn't really act the way that you would expect someone who's missing their wife to act. He didn't really ask many questions. He wasn't alarmed. He wasn't asking what's next steps to take. He was oddly collected. The detective said that he didn't think that Scott did it initially, but he definitely had a bad feeling about him. A team of over 30 police officers, friends and family, and over 1,500 volunteers would search the entire Modesto area looking for Laci. Police announced that this really wasn't in Laci's character and that most likely that she had been taken by someone. The family had ended up actually offering up $500,000 reward for anyone who had any information leading to Laci's return. By this point, the entire country is entranced with what's going on with Laci, but at the same time that this is happening, something else nefarious has been going on behind the scenes. In November 2002, Scott was introduced to Amber Fry by one of his work friends, and quickly they started a romantic relationship together. When they first met, Scott had said that he was single, had never been married, and didn't give Amber any clue to his regular life back in Modesto. On their first date, before they actually went out anywhere, Scott had actually invited Amber up to his room because he said he wanted to take a shower, he wanted to get ready. And so they agreed and they both went up there. When they actually arrived in the room, Scott had champagne and strawberries ready, and he had really set the mood to really try and impress her. And Amber would say that she was really taken with him really quickly. And Amber would later admit that she was really impressed by it all. Later that night, they went to a Japanese restaurant, and Scott had reserved an entire private room for them to have their date at. Amber asked, had Scott ever been married, and he said, no, I've never been married. With my career, I don't have the time. He told her that he traveled all over the world for business, and actually that his company was based out of Spain, so he didn't have time for a wife, a girlfriend, or a dog, even. Amber had grown up in Fresno, California, and her parents had split up pretty early on when she was young. And she did have a daughter. Pretty soon after she became pregnant, the father had left, but Amber was determined. She had pushed herself through massage therapy school and had even hopes of one day opening up her own business. Amber was very adamant about the truth. She made that very clear to Scott from the beginning. She always felt that it was better to have the harsh truth than to have a lie, because the lie would end up leading to mistrust, and from that point she found it so hard to repair things and to make amends. And Scott said, no, I agree, the truth is important. On December 9th, Scott would end up calling Amber really out of nowhere, and she was really surprised by it. He was sort of erratic a little bit, and he needed to admit that I haven't been honest with you this whole time. And he would admit that he was married at a point, but he would go on to say that his wife had just recently passed away, and that this upcoming holiday season would be the first one that he had without his wife. Now, Amber, of course, was very sympathetic to the struggle that he allegedly had. And she didn't question it any more than what he had said, because she felt it was out of place, it was inappropriate. She didn't want to pry. She felt, he confided in me, he was honest, and that's all I asked for. So she didn't push anything past that. But the truth was, his wife was alive and pregnant, nearly 8 months pregnant. with their son Connor. And while Laci attended a Christmas party alone, Scott would actually be away, as he would tell Laci, on a business trip, but really he was out with Amber at the time. The next day after their date, Scott would tell Amber that he would be gone for the next couple weeks, that he'd be traveling off the holidays, visiting Maine to see family, and that ultimately he was spending New Year's in Paris. But in reality, he wasn't going to any of those places. He would be back at Modesto with Laci. He would continue to call Amber every day, saying what extravagant event he was doing, duck hunting in Maine with his father, when he was actually just getting a haircut with Laci. Amber was completely unaware of the whole situation with Laci to begin with. She really wasn't someone to watch the news or television for that matter. So she was pretty much just in the dark about really what was going on. To her, Scott was still this great guy that she was having a wonderful time with. But, that really wasn't the case. On Christmas Day, when everyone is searching around for Laci, trying to look for where she could be, and Scott's supposed to be this mourning husband, this man who wants to find his wife, he actually makes it a point to call twice that day to talk to Amber. It wasn't that much longer that Amber began to really have her suspicions that Scott wasn't being completely honest with her. There was a point where she wanted to ask, if I want to send you a Christmas present, Scott, where do I send it to? And he gave her address in Modesto. And that was really the first thing that sort of made her heart sink and realize there's something going on, because in all the things they've talked about, Modesto was never brought up in any of it. And she remembers even later on December 26th, she would plan to call him. At that moment, he's supposed to be on a flight to Paris, so his message should go straight to voicemail. But Scott picks up. And that was another red flag for her. And he just says, I'm in New York. And he doesn't really give her a clear answer. And so with each of those little things, she begins to grow more and more suspicious of what the truth is with him. So with all this starting to add up, she decided to ask one of her cop friends to go ahead and look into Scott for her, because she was worried. She wanted to know what was going on. And so on December 29th at 1:40 in the morning, she would get a call from her friend saying, you need to call the Modesto Police Department and tell them everything with Scott. Amber was completely shocked by the truth with Scott. She quickly contacted Modesto Police, and she explained that my name is Amber Fry, and I am the girlfriend of Scott Peterson. We've been together since November, and to the best of her ability, explained just what her involvement was. And quickly, police were almost ecstatic to have it. They felt like it was finally a breakthrough. They were getting somewhere, because at this point, they really had no lead to what happened to Laci. And sort of this was the first indication that this could be Scott. Police then asked Amber if she'd be willing to record a conversation with Scott to see what he might come up with, what he might reveal throughout it. And she agreed. She was completely willing to comply and cooperate with them in any way that she could. On New Year's Day, Scott called and said that he was celebrating New Year's in Paris, that it was incredible, and it was this great party going on. But in reality, as he's talking to her, he's at a candlelight vigil for Laci back in Modesto. People are praying for her safe return, and he's talking to his girlfriend on the phone. Soon after that, Amber finally confronted Scott about the truth about Laci, and she was livid. How could you lie to me? How could you not tell me the truth? And Scott said that, he apologized. His wife was missing, and he didn't know where she was. He just doesn't know what's going on, and that he didn't want to tell her anything because he wanted to protect her, that he knew what a media circus has become, and just that he didn't want her to be involved. He wanted to protect her. So far, no one knows that Scott has been having an affair with Amber until someone sends in a picture of Amber and Scott clearly flirting, clearly being together at a Christmas party, and they send it to the National Enquirer. Now, the National Enquirer actually goes in and calls the police beforehand and basically say, hey, we just want to give you a warning that we're going to run this story, we're going to run these pictures, but just to give you a day heads up, here it is. Amber was then forced to come out to the media and explained to the country that yes, she had been having an affair with Scott Peterson all this time. It was basically at that point, as soon as Laci's family had heard that Scott was having an affair, they pretty much lost all faith and hope in him. And they had pretty much assumed at this point, if he could be doing this, he could have killed our daughter. On April 13, 2003, a couple walking their dog would discover the body of a fetus along the San Francisco Bay shores. The next day, the body of a pregnant woman would also be discovered just a mile away from where the infant was found. Now, the body of Laci, when it was found, was in really bad shape. Basically, her limbs were missing, she was decapitated, and it was just her torso they had found. And it was so badly decomposed that they couldn't actually identify her, but through DNA testing, they were able to confirm that yes, the bodies were that of Laci and Connor. Because of how bad in shape the bodies were, the autopsy couldn't come to any type of conclusion to what the cause of death actually was. On April 18, 2003, Scott was arrested outside of a golf course where he was said to be meeting his father. Now, when he was arrested, he had actually had really changed his look. He had blonde hair, blonde beard. He didn't really look like the Scott Peterson that had been in the media up to that point. Now, when police searched his car, they had found it to be overstuffed with personal belongings, clothes. There was $15,000 in cash. There was 4 cell phones. He had his brother's ID, and there were even Viagra tablets. Scott explained that he had changed his appearance just to try to kind of get away from the media. He was very recognizable at that point. He was trying to go about his life as best as he could without being handled by all the news. He'd also said that he felt like he was being followed, and actually he had called his family at a point before he got to the golf course saying that he felt like he was being followed by the media, but in reality it was the police that ended up pulling him over. He was being tracked. Actually, at a point the police had actually put a GPS tracker in his car just to see where he was going, to try to figure out something about could he lead them to Laci if he did do it. Police really didn't believe that he was just going there to play golf with his family, and they had pretty much drawn the conclusion that he was getting ready to flee to Mexico. On April 21st, 2003, Scott was charged with 2 felony counts of murder in his defense, and he pleaded not guilty. The trial began on June 1st, 2004, and would span months. It was actually decided they couldn't hold the trial in Modesto because they felt it was too closely connected, that the community was too closely connected to what had happened. They wouldn't be able to find an unbiased jury. And so with that, it was decided to move the trial 90 miles away to San Mateo County. Scott's family was actually able to hire the famous lawyer Mark Garagos for the defense team. He had worked with clients like Winona Ryder and Robert Downey Jr. before. Now, they really didn't have that much physical evidence for the trial that could link Scott to Laci's disappearance and murder. One of the only pieces that they could have was a pair of pliers that they found in Scott's workshop that did have a strand of hair that they presumed to be Laci's, although because it didn't have the follicle within it, they couldn't actually fully test to see that if it was Laci's or not. Scott's defense team definitely had its work cut out for them. An awkward moment for them was when they had the medical examiner come up and testify. The medical examiner said that Laci had died no later than December 29th. But when he was cross-examined by the prosecutor, he had started sort of almost panicking and had said, really, he came up with that conclusion basically by hearsay from the media and other reports, and that he actually really couldn't come to that conclusion with the evidence that he had. At the end of his testimony, he just sort of cracks and is going, "Can you cut me some slack?" Which was definitely a fumble for Scott's side of the defense. But the thing that Scott's defense team did have that was working for them was that there was just a lack of physical evidence to show that Scott did anything. Although another bizarre idea from the defense team was that Laci had actually disappeared because a satanic cult in the area had kidnapped and murdered her. But no one was really buying that, and that pretty much quickly they abandoned that pretty much as soon as they said it. No, that really wasn't going to work out that way. Once Amber Fry came up to testify, though, that really was basically the win for the prosecutors right there. Even the jurors would go on later to say that once they heard what she had to say, that really was a turning point for them, and to see that Scott really did it. The prosecutor and the media had basically put together that the motive for Scott was that he wanted to be single. He wanted to live a life free of a wife, of a kid, and for Scott, the only way out of that was to murder Laci. Then finally, on November 12th, 2004, Scott was convicted of first-degree murder for his wife Laci and second-degree murder for the death of his son Connor. Scott Peterson was sentenced to death, and the judge's really sort of final say on his case was that it was cruel, uncaring, heartless, and callous. Some updates currently for this case were that in 2022, the Supreme Court of California actually did end up overturning Scott's death penalty. Their reasoning was because they felt that they found that the jurors were dismissed if they had opposed capital punishment, but that they weren't actually asked if they could put aside their views to implement the law that was there at the time. But the conviction stayed, and Scott is currently to this day still in prison. And even as of this moment, his and his defense team are still trying to get a retrial, and even the prosecutors are working on trying to get retrial for him to get the conviction back for the death penalty as well. And that's a tragic story of the murder of Laci Peterson and her son Connor. If you like today's video and you'd like to check out more, make sure to subscribe, check the bell notifications. We'll be posting twice a month on here. And if you like this, please check out the other content that we make here on the channel. And thanks guys for watching. We'll see you guys later.